Today's episode is brought to you by Transporter. No, not that Transporter. The Transporter is a storage device that lets you create your own private cloud for syncing, accessing, protecting, and sharing your data. Now, while you can do that with something like Dropbox, if you have anything like a serious amount of data you want to store or share, you can't do it as safely nor as economically. With Transporter, you don't have to worry about who has access to your digital life because you make that decision. Your stuff's not stored in an unseen server farm, who knows where. It's stored on a physical device that you control. You share with whom you want to share, whether they have a transporter or not. As for cost, 100 gigabytes of storage on Dropbox will run you $99 a year. If you already have a drive you want to use, you can pay $99 one time for the Transporter sync and get the same functionality without the recurring costs or security concerns. 500 gigabytes on Dropbox will cost you close to $500 a year. You can do that, or you can spend $249 one time for a 1 terabyte transporter. That's more storage, more security, and a one-time cost that's less than half of what you pay on Dropbox for less. The benefits of a transporter are big. Learn more about them for yourself at filetransporterstore.com. Check out the models and offers they have available. Then, when you decide to buy at a discount. Offer code MLOG, M-L-O-G, will get you 10% off on your order. All caps, no spaces, M-L-O-G. MLOG will get you 10% off when you buy your transporter at filetransporterstore.com. They come with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you've really got nothing to lose. Beam yourself to filetransporterstore.com to find out more. Transporter, storage and sharing made simple and secure. Brought to you by Connected Data, and we do thank them for sponsoring this week's Mission Log.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 77, The Savage Curtain.
Welcome to another spellbinding edition of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Spells not included. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm John Champion. Each week, we're pitted in a fight of good versus evil to determine the morals, meanings, and messages of every single episode of Star Trek from the very beginning to the very end.
Funny you should mention good and evil, John, because this week good and evil go at it for all the marbles when we find out what's behind the Savage Curtain.
Ken, I'm pretty sure that I watched this episode and I did not see marbles anywhere in it. I
actually didn't see a curtain. You know, and I was going to make the joke, you know, It was good to see that the Savage Curtain matched the theme of the show today. But before we even get to the theme of the show or what the show's about or any of that stuff, well, we already said good and evil, but before we get to the intricacies of what the show is about, we got to get to the intricacies of trivia.
Yes, a lot of cool stuff to talk about. So I'm going to give you kind of the tip of the iceberg, and I encourage all of you to dig deeper to find more. But a few things that I wanted to point out here. There is a cut scene, which would have been an additional scene of Kirk, Spock, and Lincoln, President Abraham Lincoln, in the briefing room having a chat. And it maybe reveals a little bit more about this Lincoln avatar's confusion about where he is and what he knows and does not know about where he is. So you can actually find that dialogue online. Herschel Doherty, who directed Operation Annihilate, also directed this episode. The teleplay is by Arthur Heinemann. You may remember that I mentioned him in previous episodes. He was primarily an animator who turned to writing. He wrote The Way to Eden, and he wrote the teleplay for Wink of an Eye. The story is by Gene Roddenberry. So even though Gene has been somewhat absent in season 3, this story was originally created by him and then fleshed out into a teleplay by Arthur Heinemann. Now, I found this really fascinating. Mark Leonard, who we have seen before, of course, as Spock's father, Surak, and of course as the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror, was originally tapped to play Abraham Lincoln, and he wanted to do it, but he had a scheduling conflict that prevented him from taking the role.
I guess it would have been too confusing to have him play Surak.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah.
But
yeah,
it also would have been just nutty to have him,
yeah.
play Lincoln, especially with two other Vulcans on screen. I know people who haven't seen the show. Wait, who's this other Vulcan? Well, we'll get to him.
I know,
but that's a crazy idea.
It's kind of, you have to assume then that during the production of a show at that time, they were just thinking, well, these shows don't really play in reruns and we're coming up to the end. So who's going to know? It's been so long since we've had Mark Leonard and we really like him. Let's bring him back to do something.
5 years from now, nobody's going to remember Star Trek.
Nobody will remember.
Yeah.
None. We need to mention that it is the same guy in the Horta costume as in the Excalibur rock monster costume. That is Janos Prohaska. Yes, so he made a bit of a brief career playing rocks.
He's like the Andy Serkis of his time.
Yes, good call.
Thanks.
Did you notice how could you not notice the white weapons belt in this episode? A lot of Velcro going on, and it was one of the rare moments of seeing these kind of off-colored additions to the costumes. I thought that was a little bit strange. How about Colonel Green's costume, that red jumpsuit? Did you like that? Because you're going to see a lot more of it on Mork later in Happy Days and Mork and Mindy.
What are you talking about?
Colonel Green in this episode, he's wearing that red jumpsuit, right?
Yes.
That costume was then worn by Robin Williams when he played Mork.
Wait, the same red jumpsuit?
The same red jumpsuit.
Get out.
I would not lie to you, Ken.
Really?
Yes, I promise you.
What? How bereft was Hollywood in the 1970s that they had to reuse a jumpsuit?
I know, right?
Because, I mean, they put stuff on the jumpsuit. He didn't, Colonel Green didn't have the big silver triangle that Mork had.
No, they redressed it a little bit.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah, they have the same collar, all right? And it's the same fabric, obviously. But you take off Colonel Green's medallions, and then you put on the thing that Mork had, the big triangle thing. That
is just dumb. I mean, that's
Crazy, huh?
neat. Now I want that jumpsuit even more than I did before.
Yeah.
That jumpsuit, though, not just another one, because apparently that one has mystical powers.
Exactly.
Weird.
We have to mention the guest stars because we have a lot of guest stars, and I'm just going to give you the bare bones of what they did. Carol Daniels, Nathan Young, Errol Blanton, lots of credits for everybody, primarily in TV. Bob Heron, who played Kales, was actually a stuntman, and he appeared in The Cage. He did stunts for that episode way back when. So as we barrel toward the end of season 3, barrel toward the end of TOS, we're bringing back people, which is kind of nice. You're like, hey, remember that guy we worked with 4 years ago? Let's bring him back. Philip Pine, speaking of Colonel Green, another actor with just a huge number of credits. And he actually did appear in Happy Days, but not in an episode with Mork. So he did not get reunited with his old costume, I'm sorry to say. Lee Bergère played Lincoln. He had a massive career in TV, but he is best known on Dynasty, where he was a regular. I think he did about 70 episodes of that show. And Surak, we mentioned, Barry Atwater, just fantastic. He died too young at the age of 60 in 1978. Ton of TV credits like Mission Impossible, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Night Gallery, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Perry Mason. I mean, you name it, that guy was in it.
Wait, that's it?
Yeah, that's all that Barry Atwater did. He did, I mentioned it all.
No, I'm pretty sure you're missing one.
Oh, wait. Okay, Ken. He was actually in The Night Stalker.
Wait, what? Which Night Stalker? Which Night Stalker was he in?
Okay, he was in The Night Stalker, which was the TV movie that then became the series Kolchak, the Night Stalker.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, he played the vampire Janos, same name as the guy in the Horta costume.
That is, wow. That's nutty.
Yeah, I just blew your mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a little confused now. So was Darren McGavin in the movie The Night Stalker?
Yes, he was.
Okay, so they did do that together.
They did.
See, because here's another little known fact. Mm-hmm. There's a deleted scene from A Christmas Story where we actually met Mr. Bumpus, and guess who played him?
Who?
Barry Atwater. Now, it is quite possible that I am making that up.
It is.
In fact, I would say it's more than possible. It's likely.
And that's why I do trivia.
That's why you do trivia, because I'll just tell you whatever. I'll just make stuff up. Yeah, the original Enterprise actually made out of a shoebox. Yeah.
Right.
There's a little trivia for you. Share that with your friends.
Is it just me? Or does Lincoln's first appearance on screen look like an advertisement for a Civil War chess set from the Franklin Mint?
Prologue. The Enterprise is checking out a planet by orders of the Federation. Rumor has it there's life here, and some of Spock's instruments suggest that too. But the atmosphere is poisonous and the surface is molten lava. Life would be impossible here, and Kirk decides to push on. As it's preparing to leave orbit, however, something approaches the Enterprise. A man in a stovepipe hat, in a chair, sitting in front of and communicating with the Enterprise. His name, he says, is Abraham Lincoln. Act 1. Well, it looks like Abraham Lincoln. Spock says whatever it is has scanned enough of the ship to present the Abe Lincoln illusion, a suggestion that leaves Lincoln a bit perturbed. He asks to come aboard the Enterprise to prove himself. They'll be passing over his part of the planet soon, a part that suddenly does seem able to support life. Kirk orders full ceremonial bells and whistles for the arrival of the president. He makes it clear that he doesn't believe that whatever it is the real Abraham Lincoln, but it believes it is, and Kirk's going to roll with it. One more sign that it's not Lincoln. Sensors show a rock-like creature with heavy foreclaws where Lincoln is supposed to be before it turns into something that shows up as human. Once transported, Lincoln is confused by the technology that's playing music without musicians, with the mode of conveyance that got him here. He's just a simple 19th century president. He's taking it all in stride, though. McCoy's readings indicate that he is human, leading Scotty to wonder whether the rock-like thing that he saw was actually a second being. Act 2. Kirk's giving Mr. Lincoln a tour. While he knows this can't really be Abraham Lincoln, he confides to the captain's log that the guy is exactly what Kirk would expect Abraham Lincoln to be. On the bridge, Mr. Lincoln encounters Lieutenant Uhura. He says something that he's suddenly worried might be offensive, but she says people aren't uptight about such things the way they once were, and all is well. Kirk says everybody's learned to get along with everybody now, provided, of course, they're not dirty hippies. Kirk says the Vulcans got that centuries before the humans did, a fact to which Spock attests, making a mild pitch for Idic, pendant not included. Yes, says Lincoln, the philosophy of gnome, meaning all. Everyone is surprised that Lincoln knows that, including Mr. Lincoln, who has no idea how he came by such knowledge. Just like he has no idea how he knows that when Spock beams down to the planet later, he'll meet one of the greatest Vulcans in the history of Vulcan. Oh, what's his name? Starts with a letter. Anyway, he'll be there. Now back to the tour. Uhura will show Mr. Lincoln around as Kirk and Spock head off to meet with McCoy and Scotty. McCoy and Scotty, who are not happy. Why is Kirk treating this alien like Lincoln? And wait a minute, seriously, you and Spock are beaming down to a planet that just a couple of hours ago was totally poisonous and totally covered with lava? That may in fact still be totally poisonous and still be totally covered with lava? Kirk says he knows that Lincoln is actually an alien. He wonders, though, why the alien took that form. Spock says it's obvious. Lincoln is a very personal hero of Kirk's, so what better way to rope him in? So is that going to work? Oh yes, beaming down to the poisonous lava-ridden planet, over the objection of Scotty and McCoy, and since Spock was invited, he can come too. Scotty beams Kirk, Spock, and Lincoln away, though when they transport, their phasers and tricorders stay behind. On the surface, they can breathe, and they're not drowning in lava. So that's good. They're not able to make contact with the Enterprise, though, so that's not good. Suddenly, Kirk's had enough of all this Lincoln business. Time to say who and what you are, Mr. Not Lincoln. Lincoln says he has no idea what's going on. As far as he knows, he is Abraham Lincoln, just as the tall Vulcan coming around from behind that rock knows that he is Surak, prototypical Vulcan of history. The first one who was all like, hey, you know what? Logic. The greatest Vulcan ever, according to Spock. Aboard the Enterprise, things are getting screwy. Power's going in and out, warps out, communications are hinky. They can't even turn the ship off and turn it back on. So I guess the windows aren't working either. Back on the planet, Surak is giving Spock a good talking to about the Vulcan way. I say live long and prosper. You don't say live long and prosper back. Also, you showed a bit of emotion when you saw me, Spock. I'm sorry, is this Surak or Sarek? Surak says hello to Kirk, too, again giving the minor idic pitch, though Kirk's done with all this historical figure game of charades stuff. Suddenly, one of the rocks starts moving and talking. It's actually a rock-like creature with heavy foreclaws. He's from the planet Excalibur, the population of which is tuned in and watching the drama about to unfold here, as is the crew of the Enterprise. Kirk, Spock, Lincoln, and Surak, time for you to defend your way of life, good, versus Genghis Khan, 21st century genocidal Earth warrior Colonel Green, Tiburon's own mad scientist Zora, and the Klingon who needs no introduction but will give him one anyway, the one who made Klingon society a little less civil and a little more bloody, Kahless the Unforgettable. The Excalibur says these two teams, one representing good, the other representing evil, will fight to the death to prove which is stronger, good or evil. He freely admits that they don't get the whole good and evil thing. Making beings fight tends to be how they learn. Or how they think they learn anyway. Act 3. Scotty and McCoy talk over possible ways to help the landing party. Well, McCoy does. Scotty says they don't have enough power to do anything except watch the proceedings. On the planet, the Excalibur wants to know what the holdup is. Get to fighting, you two. Kirk says he and Spock won't fight, though the Excalibur thinks they will change their minds. Colonel Green, apparent captain of Team Evil, comes over to talk things over. This is crazy, huh, Captain Kirk? Let's figure out a way out of this together. This was, of course, a trick. Team Evil attacks Team Good. They're able to repel them, though. Spock suggests they prepare for a new attack, though Kirk says Colonel Green was right. The rock-like thing is their enemy, not Team Evil. Surak agrees, though the Excalibur says it's disappointed. We offer you a chance to become our teachers by demonstrating whether good or evil is more powerful. Kirk tries to attack the Excalibur, which seems to give the Excalibur an idea. Why don't you call your ship, Kirk? He does and finds that the Enterprise is in a world of hurt. Probably going to blow up in about 4 hours. Yeah, that's me, says the Excalibur. Win and they'll live, refuse to fight or lose the fight, and the Enterprise will be destroyed. So get to fighting. Kirk and Lincoln start devising a plan. Find a defensible position, make or gather weapons. Surak thinks they should try reasoning with Green instead. So he goes off to do that. Kirk suggests that the rest of the men continue their defensive moves in case he fails. Which he does. Back at their camp, Kirk, Spock, and Lincoln hear a screaming Surak. He calls for Spock's help as we go to commercial. Act 4. Surak keeps calling to Spock as Team Evil goads him. You gonna let your friend die, Spock? Kirk asks how Spock can let that happen to Surak, though Spock says, that's not Surak. Surak would not cry out so. But it's someone, argues Kirk, ready to go save whomever it is. Spock says, that's what they want you to do. President Lincoln has a plan. Kirk and Spock should create a distraction while Lincoln sneaks around and frees Surak. And when it comes time to kill, says Lincoln, do it. Be as merciless as Team Evil. There is no honorable way to kill, no gentle way to destroy. There is nothing good in war except its ending. Plus, you got your ship and crew to consider. Mostly things go according to Lincoln's plan. Except Surak is already dead and Lincoln gets killed. Time for another melee round, with Kirk and Spock rolling 18 or better on every throw. Team Evil is incapacitated, and the Excalibur deems the contest concluded. It's bummed, though. Kirk and the others have failed to demonstrate to it the differences between their opposing philosophies, except that evil retreats when confronted by force. You guys do the same things and achieve the same ends. Kirk argues that they did that based on the parameters set up by the Excalibur, though the Excalibur argues they had free will inside those parameters, and with that it turns back into an inanimate rock. Everything is back to rights on the Enterprise. Kirk and Spock beam back aboard and talk over what happened. Kirk says, having seen the Lincoln that was made up from his imagination die, he kind of feels like he knows what Earth went through in its darkest hours before attaining lasting peace. But there's still so much of the work of Lincoln and Surak to be done. Maybe they'll get to that on their next assignment. The end.
Hey, Ken, there was a bit early on when Lincoln is standing on the bridge and he says something like, "You'll pass over my logo." I'm sorry, the avatar of Lincoln will pass over this location in 12 minutes. You do still use minutes, don't you? And Kirk says, "Oh, we can convert to it." And I thought, when did suddenly minutes become a different thing?
Yes, I know. It's something they bring back later on, though. I mean, if
immediately.
Well, then, too. It's something they've talked about before. Hey, maybe, I've used this a lot lately. Maybe they were trying something sort of like we tried the metric system in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
They got a memo from Starfleet saying, "Yeah, we're not going to do minutes anymore. We're going to do ooplos or something." I don't know.
Right.
I'm making something up, as they were apparently. And so, this week, okay, we'll go back to minutes for you.
Right. See, I kept in my mind, I extrapolated the scene of Lincoln trying to buy something on the ship. Like, here, I've got these coins with my face on it. I'll have to convert these to quatlus, I guess.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. You never know. It is weird, actually, a lot of the stuff that changes between, well, certainly from Lincoln's time, even just to our time, but then from our time to Star Trek time, the philosophy of gnome has changed quite a bit by the 23rd century. Unless this is just a Vulcan version of gnome. I mean, I know here on 21st century Earth, and I'm speaking to all the future men out there and women, future people, future, and whatever else we come across.
Sure.
The philosophy of gnome is closely tied to photographing and consuming well-prepared or particularly tasty sustenance on 21st century Earth. It's actually an offshoot of the philosophy yum, which sadly was co-opted by the multinational Yum brands under the despotic rule of one Colonel Harlan Sanders, a name these days not closely tied to gnome nor yum, actually, though in the right combination after a rough bout of shore leave. 11 herbs and spices can still do the trick. Just have a wet nap handy and keep the bag, because you may need it.
Man, that was its own show.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Great. 2 shows nightly. Yeah, and if you want to know more about Yum brand, sticker symbol YUM, please consult Barron's or the Wall Street Journal.
Nicely done.
Yeah.
Just not that long ago, we talked about space hippies.
Yeah.
And Kirk shows way more respect to fake Lincoln than he ever did to a bunch of space hippies. And they were real.
Crazy, right? Well, no, Lincoln is real. He just might not really be Lincoln.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. No, Kirk's got it bad for authority.
Yeah.
I mean, go back to Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. Here's a guy who's like black on one side, white on another, and then another guy who's white on one side, black on another. He can look at them and say, there's really no difference between you two, but he automatically goes with the guy who's like, I am the authority pursuing that other guy. Well, you are my friend then. I get that. Right.
Let me pour you a drink.
If we come across any hippies, by the way, can you do something about them too? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, they're not authority. They're not like us. We're like authority, right? Huh?
Right.
Am I right, fellow authoritarian?
We've mentioned a few times before kind of outmoded technology or technology that gets changed by description to go into the show. And Kirk actually says to Lincoln that they have taped music.
Yeah.
The music is taped. And I thought, oh, how quaint. It's sort of like how we refer to the DVR as taping a show, even though there's no tape involved. That must be it.
Dude, I've been doing... I went to my first digital editing suite in 1998 for audio. 96. Mm-hmm. The last time I remember cutting tape was probably 97. Mm-hmm. And I've done a daily podcast for over 8 years as we're recording this. And I still say, I got to go tape.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ingrained in what we do.
So you'll be right in line in another 300 years.
Absolutely. I'm keeping that alive.
Yes. Yeah, please do. Now, I mentioned earlier that there was that cut scene from the conference room, and there is sort of a little bit of confusion that gets built in here because Lincoln knows he's in space. He knows that he's in a starship, but he doesn't know what a transporter is or what taped music is.
Right.
And I think had we had that missing scene, even though it's just a dialogue heavy kind of sit and talk or stand and talk kind of, it might have let on a little more about that. Is he or isn't he? Who is he? where did he come from and why does he know certain things but not know other things?
That just would have beaten the crap out of it, though, wouldn't it? I mean, I know I joked earlier about the philosophy of gnome. But, you know, I mean, he knows something about Vulcan. And there's no way that Lincoln should know anything about Vulcan. So, I mean, I'm fine with the level of confusion that he's got, that he's reading everybody's brainwaves to an extent. I'm kind of hip to that.
I think it's played a little better when we get to Green, when he says, like, well, I don't know how I got here, but I am. And, you know, I think it puts a little more fine of a point on it.
But am he really? We'll discuss that later. I assume.
We will.
Yeah, okay. All right. Hey, can we talk about what a self-centered jerk Kirk is?
Can we?
Yeah, and not just for all the usual reasons. So he's walking around for like hours, right? Like a puppy dog after Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, who was the 16th president of the United States. Now, when Kirk grows up, there's no more United States.
Right.
And let me see if I'm doing my math properly. There were 15 presidents before Lincoln. All right. So, yes, he kept the Union together, but it's a Union that is no longer together when Kirk is born, let alone as Kirk goes on. But I digress. He's not the first anything. Now, I'm not saying Lincoln's not a great historical figure, right? But then Spock meets the Vulcan, right? Spock meets Surak. Before Surak, they were just a bunch of guys hitting each other with clubs, apparently. They, you like that guy's wife? Take her. If you can, you like that guy's property? Go for it. I mean, they were like us, basically, before Surak, right? And then Surak comes along, and then Spock gets to meet the guy, and Kirk's like, I don't have time for this crap anymore, and it gives him like maybe 20 seconds. Maybe 20 seconds to be in awe of the guy who, for all intents and purposes, started his civilization after 2 hours of resurrecting the Abraham Lincoln fan club on board the Enterprise.
Right.
It just struck me as just, it annoyed me in a way that maybe a little excessively. As I'm saying it out loud, I think maybe I got a little hung up on that.
No, I'm right there with you because I kind of wanted more of Surak because I was so fascinated with how difficult he must have been to follow. I mean, the exchange that he has with Spock when Spock sees him for the first time and has what to us is not even a faint glimmer of an emotion, but Surak calls him out on it.
Right.
And Spock apologizes. Oh, please forgive me. Oh, let us speak no further of it. And just the amount of repression, it just says so much about Vulcans.
Yes, it does. It does
and
indeed.
I really enjoyed that.
Spock, you embarrassed yourself. I'm sorry. You're doing it again.
Right.
Just don't even talk about it.
Yeah.
I can't even talk about it anymore. I also am a huge fan of his philosophy, by the way. Seriously, his philosophy of, peace over war. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing, though, he was like that 20th guy that they sent, right? Because when he's telling the story about, so we used to have fights on Vulcan, and what we did was we sent an emissary of peace, and they killed him. So,
so we
sent more, and they killed them too. But eventually... they ran out of stuff to kill people with, or they just got bored with it, or maybe they were tired, and they were like, seriously, you guys aren't going to stop, are you? Fine. And that man was Surak.
Right. Lucky him.
Exactly.
Yeah. I found that story to be just as humorous.
It's a good story. I mean, I get what, I mean, and I feel certain we will actually get into some of that philosophy in a bit as well. But I love that he obviously wasn't the first one over the wall.
Oh, no. Yeah. No. Yeah, because he would not be there to tell the tale. There's a technical thing that I wanted to point out. Did you see that terrible insert shot of Lincoln recycled from a later shot right before Surak screams?
There were actually a couple of those. Normally, I noticed them. They pushed in really hard on the optical printer this time. We talked about this, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, where you were like, "Oh, that's a bad optical printer shot," and I was kind of like, "Who cares?" But these are terrible.
Yeah, there was a terrible one of Surak on the optical push, and then the insert of the slowed down Lincoln. Very, very strange. It's over dialogue between Kirk and Spock, and you just have to go, well, what happened to that shot of Kirk and Spock that was so bad you couldn't just stay on it?
It could have been a boom mic. Although, why not actually just pull in closer on whichever one was speaking then?
Yeah. Because apparently they don't mind pushing in.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah.
Although it may have been a writer on Shatner's contract that he never looked grainy.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I have that in my contract too. Klingons, we learned about a new superpower they have. They are excellent voice mimics.
Well, just Kalis.
Well,
we don't know. He may be the Frank Gorshin of Klingon.
Right.
Of Klingons, rather.
Kalis the Great, who is also awesome at voice mimicry and fun at parties.
Right. Kalis the Unforgettable. Kalis the Unforgettable Mimic.
No, not so great with the acting on that. And I don't mean the actor playing Kalis, but I mean Kalis, the actor, actually being convincing. Like, he could get the voice, but then he didn't really sell it.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I'm with you. Well,
Kirk,
but he wasn't trying
me.
to, though. Well, yeah, okay. Yes. I'm with you on that, I suppose.
He was like, okay, Kalis, play nonchalant.
Yeah, no, you see, I think actually, though, that whole thing was sort of ill-conceived. Team Evil was just poorly conceived. There's no way a Klingon is going to take orders from a human.
No.
To start.
No. Yeah.
But additionally, you get the most ruthless Klingon and the most ruthless human together. I mean, I guess it's a bit like Germany and Japan in the 1940s. That was also ill-conceived, because had things gone the way that they planned, eventually, when there's nobody else to kill, they're going to start killing each other. I just find it hard to believe that Kalis and Green would have actually gone 2 minutes before, like, one of them stuck a knife in the other one.
Yeah.
And then said, okay, so the rest of you got the message, right?
Right. Well, but
Genghis Khan, just quiet down, okay?
Right. But that comes back to the whole thing about them being the mental projections.
No.
So that, well, if the Excalbians are controlling that much, then they're controlling. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It's not a great league of supervillains in that respect.
Well, it's a great league of supervillains. The only problem is I think supervillains work alone.
Yeah. But speaking of these villains, I mean, well, not just the villains, but what's cool about this episode is you have introduction to a lot of figures that we take for granted later in Star Trek. And I thought that was really cool, most notably Surak and Kalis. But even Colonel Green will show up later. I kid you not, Ken. So wait for that day many, many years from now as we do more Mission Log.
You know what would have been amazing? If Kirk's hero had been a cartoon mouse, or a clown, or a star of adult films. That would have seriously changed this episode.
So I'm not going to say right now whether I like this episode or whether I don't. I will say there is one kind of logic problem that has stymied me as we watched in preparation for this show.
Hey, call Surak.
Whose projections were these? And I guess I mean Team Evil in particular.
Yeah.
Is there an actual member of Team Evil there?
Right.
It seems unlikely that there is, since Scotty says they're all figures from history, right? Mm-hmm. So that means, I mean, either they're pulling people from other times as well as space, or these are all projections from the Enterprise, or from the crew members of the Enterprise, right?
Right.
That means the trickery exhibited by Team Evil is just a projection from the minds of Kirk and Spock.
Yeah.
So, just like Lincoln and Surak are, right?
Yep.
And that means that Kirk and Spock have no clear concept of the selfish motive. Right. They've got evil being evil for evil's sake, right? A real Colonel Green would absolutely have worked the deal that he tried to work with Kirk in a heartbeat, because he doesn't want to be stuck on that planet with only those 4 people. Mm-hmm. Especially... And this is confusing because Khan fought his genetics wars in the, or his eugenics wars in the 1990s, and we know that from past episodes of Star Trek, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Green was 21st century. Well, right. We've kind of been given the impression that once they beat Khan, they beat all the warlords, and that was over. Apparently, we're in for a little bit more hurt, which is kind of too bad. But a real Colonel Green, even as terrible as he was, would have worked that deal with Kirk. He would have screwed Kirk the second he got, to the Enterprise, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Instead, though, they are cardboard cutouts of bad guys. He's not even interested in getting off this planet. He's just interested in fighting them.
Yeah.
So the question that we're left with is, whose cardboard cutouts are these?
Well, okay, I think we're going to come back to the evil discussion probably a little bit later. But to answer the question at hand here, or to attempt the question at hand, whose cardboard cutouts are these? Yeah, I kind of had to sit there and do some mental gymnastics myself and say that these are definitely projections. The only two real people there, naturally occurring people, are Kirk and Spock. And I have to assume that this is a combination of that deep scan that the Excalbians did on the Enterprise very, very early in the show. And they're looking at records going, okay, well, Genghis Khan, that one sounds good. And Colonel Green, sure, that one sounds good too. But then...
Should we take Colonel Mustard? No.
Right.
He's
only
useless.
In the parlor.
Yes,
only
exactly.
in the parlor. And then filling in the sort of personality traits based on possibly Kirk, possibly Spock, maybe even some other crewmen that we're not seeing but may have gotten a mental probe from the Excalbians. I think this is just a combination. What's interesting to me is that it does play out that way, though, that Colonel Green and Kirk talk very early on, and it's as Kirk is saying, well, wait a minute, your tactic was to attack during a negotiation. And sure enough, that's what happens. So I kind of felt like, oh, okay, well, this is Kirk sort of driving the narrative subconsciously, you know?
Yeah, okay, the only problem I have with what you're saying, I mean, I like the idea of an alien race trying to figure out the whole concept of good and evil. I mean, that's actually kind of a fun thing to play with, right? But if all of this is based on a scan of the people on the Enterprise and presumably the Enterprise itself,
right,
which of course has, you know, all human knowledge stored in its computer banks.
Yep.
Good one. As far as the Federation is concerned, as far as the Vulcans are concerned, as far as the humans are concerned, good one. So, I mean, why is this alien saying, okay, so they conquered war, they made peace with other races, they've got this whole federation, for crying out loud, a federation of planets, which is a lot. I'm still not convinced good's the way to go, though. So what am I going to do?
Well, but I mean, if they were looking at the records, they still see like, oh, okay, well, they still fight Klingons, they still fight Romulans.
Well, not if they can help it.
Not if they can help it. Sure.
They've actually drawn lines in space, which is tough to do.
Yes.
That they can't cross. And, the other guys actually make sure they don't cross the lines in space. Equally difficult to do.
Yeah.
And then they fight.
Yeah.
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 It's also interesting that, I mean, that Green had no problem being called evil.
Right.
And
right.
Kalis had no problem being called evil.
Well, but again...
And what's her name had no problem being called evil.
Yeah, well, she had no say in it, clearly. Neither
she
nor
no
Genghis
say,
Khan.
Period. I know, Genghis Khan. And by the way, what a cream puff Genghis Khan turns out to be, huh?
Yeah,
Again,
I know.
listening to... And does he speak English? That's the other... See? Okay.
Uh-huh.
Or basic. Is it universal basic, just like in the Star Wars role-playing game?
It's standard.
Okay,
Yes,
okay,
it's
good.
standard. Yeah.
They've all got babelfish. It's cool.
Yeah. Well, that kind of goes back to the thing that whatever is happening there is sort of interpreted through the minds of Kirk and Spock. You know, we're just saying right from the get-go, well, these people consider themselves good. Let's put them against what they would consider to be evil, and we'll see how it plays out. And then whatever these other these avatars of evil do, that's really just going to be based on their interpretation of it, which I thought was very interesting because from a scientific point of view, I liked the idea of how memories are not very good and they are very incomplete. You know, you mentioned that it was interesting to you that Kirk would so idolize Lincoln, of all people to pick, because here he is, 400 years removed from Lincoln. It would be like you idolizing, well, you may very well idolize Shakespeare's works, but you may not really have a grasp of Shakespeare the person. Right. Because you kind of can't, we're just too far removed.
Don't tell me I can't, mister.
Well, I know you have the posters on the wall.
Exactly. I can tell you how he walked. I can tell you how he talked.
Exactly.
Of course I can't, but I guess, if I go to this planet, I'll be able to.
But the thing that was interesting to me is the way that memory works is that it's not a videotape. When we recall the memory, we're not just hitting rewind and play and seeing that thing again in our mind's eye. We construct memory every time we remember something based on what is sort of emotionally expedient, whatever fits with our concept of reality at that time. So pieces of it change, pieces of it will alter based on our moods. So to me, it was okay that things would be so blurry and maybe illogical the way that this would play out. I was kind of okay with that. You know?
I'm okay with it, except for the parts that happen without Kirk and Spock being there, right? Mm-hmm. So Surak goes off to talk things over, right?
Right.
And we see that, and they watch that on the Enterprise. Yeah. So this isn't just happening for their benefit. I mean, these are actual pieces. These are actual actors. And I don't mean actors in the sense that, central casting sent them down. I mean, these are actual actors in whatever deal is going on here. The battle is being fought by extras that suddenly take leading roles, but they don't exist. And they're still, we assume, all being made up from the minds of the people on the Enterprise, primarily Kirk and Spock.
Mm-hmm. But I'm okay with that because I kind of I like the idea that whatever the Excalbians created, hey, I tell you what, why don't we even call it a manufactured intelligence at that point?
Sure.
Based on the information that they gleaned from the Enterprise and its crew members.
Okay.
So then in that case, you may not even call it free will, but they do have a piece of their programming that would allow them to carry out this stuff independent of Kirk and Spock actually being there, sort of driving the action on their own.
It's an interesting idea. I don't know if I would call them manufactured intelligence, though. I might go, and I joked during the recap about Kirk and Spock rolling near critical hits on everything, but in role-playing game parlance or in video game parlance, they might actually be NPCs or non-player characters. So they have certain parameters that they're going to go through, which is kind of an interesting idea. I mean, so then you've got, so you've got the Excalbians basically taking the best that good has to offer and the best that evil has to offer, and then just, putting them together and letting them play it out without any sort of like thought, literally without any thought. Again, it's cardboard cutout theater.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, do you think that this, at the end of the day, is the Excalbian experiment legit?
No.
Okay.
Not even close. I mean, for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, there's the whole made up based on what thing that we've sort of beaten into the ground now. But I mean, second, the Excalbian is not willing to learn. He wants to know. But he doesn't want to learn. I mean, so he's coming to you saying, or coming to, Kirk and Spock saying, let me tell you how to tell me.
Right.
You were teaching me French all wrong, or, whatever. And while we can't agree that there are better ways and worse ways for some people to learn, you kind of have to have a lesson first before you find out whether or not the way that you're being taught is right or wrong.
Right.
It seems to me. And he's not doing that. He's not giving them a chance to, okay, so talk to me about this good and evil thing. It's just like, oh no, you know what always works? We put people in a place where they're going to die. And if they don't, then they were right, it turns out.
Yeah. We should hook them up with the Vians from the Empath. That would be great.
That might be kind of, well, just because it would be great to see something happen to the Vians. But even when it's done, though, he seems to think that he's learned. But he actually, the only thing that he's learned, the only thing that he thinks that he knows, isn't necessarily universally applicable. The Excalibur says that Kirk and the others have failed to demonstrate to it the differences between their opposing philosophies, except that evil retreats when confronted by force. Sometimes, but not always.
Right.
Now, I will say it's an interesting take on bullying, or it could be. I mean, had Colonel Green been stopped, on the playground, maybe he would not have become the despotic leader that he became. Then again, we can't really tell kids, hit him back. Or, better still, if somebody threatens you, you go ahead and hit them first.
Yeah.
He brings a knife, you bring a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital. You send one of his to the morgue.
That's the Chicago way.
I mean, this is actually what the Excalibur seems to have taken away from this whole thing. And he's disappointed that he didn't really gain more knowledge or gain more of an understanding, but not so disappointed that he's not going to talk about it. He's like, wow, that sucked. You guys didn't teach me anything. And they're like, well, you didn't really give us a chance. And he's like, I'm a rock again.
Right.
Bye.
Well, but that's it. Okay, so the Excalibur is very concerned about good versus evil, at least as it plays out in their little arena there. Not to be confused with Arena, which is also pitting Federation against the monster and fight to the death. It's like a lot of other advanced races we've seen in Star Trek, where their perception of humanity is, off a little bit, or maybe they're just fixated on the wrong thing, and I find that very amusing. Mm-hmm. It seems like the Excalibur already had some sense of good and evil by making the team choices it did, at least based on our records. And maybe it's just all perspective of that bad point of view. But then did it occur to the Excalibur and just sit down and talk a little about good and evil at first? No. It might have made for a very interesting philosophical discussion. Maybe they could argue the theodicies. Something like that might have made, for less action. But
well, it would have been much less action.
Yeah.
But it would have been it would have been a better, I don't know.
Because it seems like we just got that little hint at the very end of Kirk saying, well, you set the rules, so too bad.
Yeah, although we sort of, again, had that whole thing. It's kind of like all the aliens in the third season who have said, we didn't kill them, they died because they couldn't take what we were doing.
Right.
The Excalibur. So Kirk's like, you set up this fight thing that we had to do, and now you're upset that you didn't learn anything. Yeah. And the Excalibur's like, hey, I just set up the fight. I didn't say you had to. Even though he actually did.
Yeah,
he actually did say, if you don't fight, then the Enterprise will die, and so will you.
Right.
But, then afterwards he's like, hey, you had free will. I guess really what they could have done was spent the whole time arguing with the ref instead of playing the game.
Right.
And maybe that's what they should have done. I mean, maybe they should have sat with the Excalibur and gone, no, seriously, man, just think about it for a minute. Is what you're doing right now, does it feel good? If it doesn't, then you're being evil, and that's not good, is it? We have two words for it? Because they're different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They could have saved themselves a lot of time and a lot of running around.
Well, I don't know. I mean, they had 4 hours. Because that was the other thing. They were put on the clock. I don't know that I would be able to explain to what, for all intents and purposes, is a highly functioning 5-year-old the difference between good and evil, which is kind of like what you got with the Excalibur, right?
Yeah.
You only got 4 hours. Go ahead and put on a show for him. Yeah. And maybe he'll get out of it. And if you do, then you can talk to him about good and evil, provided he doesn't turn into a rock. Here's what I want to know. Where is Excalibur? Because it's not there. He says that, countless people from his world are watching.
I thought they were watching on that world.
I don't believe so. I think it's like a studio. He says that they've set up an arena. He says that they've set up a place for them to play.
But I thought that was just that Earth-like spot on their planet.
I got the impression that this was someplace else. I got the impression that he was inhabiting that rock to just be the game master. That they were sort of like the Super Bowl. I got the impression that they were in like some other place entirely.
Oh, no. See, I think the planet is Excalibur. And then all those other rock creatures that are living in its molten lava surface are elsewhere on that planet, and they are so good at sort of reconstructing and reconfiguring molecules and chemistry that then they can do things like set aside a little patch of their planet that is habitable to Earth creatures, and then it goes back. At the end of the episode, it goes back to its normal look, because if you're a rock, you're like, hey, this is great. I got I got molten rock everywhere. I can swim in this.
See, I believe that you could actually make a case for that not being the planet. But whatever. I don't care either way. It doesn't matter. I guess the one reason it does matter, if you're living in a, poisonous, lava-filled planet, what do you care about good and evil?
Yeah, right.
I mean, you've actually got it going on. As you say, if you're a rock who likes swimming around in lava and doesn't have to breathe, you have found the way to Eden, my friend. You are where you need to be. So what do you care about good and evil?
That's true. That's true. But I still have to assume that the Excaliburs have had disagreements with each other. Like, hey, you're in my pool of
They
lava.
haven't even figured out how to build a building yet, dude. Seriously?
Yeah.
I don't know. Or maybe that's part of
in many ways.
Maybe that's part of the paradise. I mean, maybe they don't have to build buildings, but then again, why do you care about good and evil? I think they're elsewhere. And it does not matter. It does not matter at all.
Yeah.
But I'm right.
I'm sure that we'll hear from people about it.
Probably so.
Hey, I want to talk about the Uhura-Lincoln exchange. Her line, in our century, we've learned not to fear words. This is so often sort of held up as a great shining moment of Star Trek. And I think it's absolutely great in sentiment. And at the same time, I do wonder, well, someone in the 23rd century still could take offense.
Yeah, but it's on them, isn't it?
I guess so. You know, I mean, there are words that we don't use because they are inappropriate. I like to think that we can look at language objectively as a series of sounds meant to communicate. They don't have like an inherent value or an inherent meaning. But I just wonder in the 23rd century, we still, you know, will there still be things that offend or at the very least are inappropriate? And I guess, you know, Lincoln's reply to that, the foolishness of my century had me apologizing where no offense was given. Well, at least he understood that it could have been offensive. And hey, better safe than sorry. You know?
I guess.
Yeah.
I'm honestly, have you seen Lenny?
Yeah, a long time ago. I do remember very well Dustin Hoffman, Valerie Perrine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I believe this was actually part of Lenny Bruce's act as well. And I can't do it. And the reason I can't do it is because we are not where Lenny Bruce was 50 years ago as we record this. But he's basically killing a room, and then he starts throwing out all of these racial epithets at people who are of the race that would be an epithet. Yeah. And he's about to have his head handed to him. And he says, well, because here's the deal, and then he uses his own racial epithet. Yeah. And his whole point is, you know what, I'm going to use that word about me that other people would use to hurt me into the ground. And I'm going to use the one about you too. And the reason I'm going to do that is because the only reason this word has power to hurt us is because we let it. Some idiot comes in and wants to insult me. And so he calls me something that he thinks is going to insult me. Well, he hasn't thrown a rock at me. It's so stupid, but sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Call me that word because you're just dumb and mean, and you're just doing it to be dumb and mean. And I can be affected by that, or I cannot. And I really, this has always been one of my favorite ideas, and it has slowly been beaten out of me over a very long time. The idea that we're going to get past it. I would love to think that we were going to get past it. The only problem is I would probably end up dying trying to get us past it. Yeah. Because, you know, you can't, the only way to get people over being offended by something, because that really is, it's just an offensive idea, right? Yeah. Is to desensitize people to it. And that's going to get me beaten with a stick. Right. If I did it. And so I'm in love with what she said. And I would like to think that we could all get over ourselves enough to get to that place. But the fact that you say, well, there might still be people who are offended. Okay, so then I got to watch my P's and Q's. And then if I keep cordoning off sections of speech that I can't use because I'm afraid that somebody's going to be offended, that's going to give some horrible person a weapon. Right. If I say, oh, I can't say that because that might upset this other person, then somebody else is going to go, oh, I'm going to say that because that's going to upset that person.
Sure, no, of course. It gives the other person power. I understand. I mean, and that's...
But I mean, we give them power then, too, if we say, oh, don't say that because that might bother that person. Yeah. I mean, we do it, and we do it all the time on this show. I mean, we have had discussions on this show about whether or not we're going to curse. Right. And we don't. And the reason we don't is because there are people listening right now who listen with their kids, and they would be offended if their kids heard the 7 deadlies that you can't say on television, which are, no, I'm kidding. Sorry. I mean, so we're not there. And I guess maybe we're never going to get there. We'll have transporters before we have people walking around saying the F word in polite conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's kind of what I was posing by pulling that out, is that I do love the sentiment. Like, it is great. I just, I wonder how, like, of all the fascinating things that are science fiction concepts in Star Trek, I feel like this may be one of the most fantastical, even though it is a great ideal to aspire to.
Yeah. Well, you know what the answer is, right?
What?
Be the change you want to be, John.
Oh, that's beautiful.
You do that, okay? You start saying everything that leaps to mind, and I'll hold your coat when you get in a fight. Hey,
a great little exploration of Idik in this episode. But what I thought was funny about it, though, so, Spock and the Vulcans are delighted. They actually use the word delighted to be who they are, and which okay, a little emotional there. And Spock calls it the combination of a number of things to make existence worthwhile, except for the combination including things like emotions and a healthy relationship with your father. But they go a little deeper when you bring in Surak, where he basically lays it out that Idik is the result of two disparate ideas coming together. He says, I am pleased to see we have differences when he meets Kirk. Let us together become greater than the sum of both of us. And I kept thinking, ask Spock how that works out when, like, a Vulcan and a human come together,
Yeah, well.
Because for Spock, this has been a very difficult road to hoe.
That's true. At the same time, it makes sense that Surak would be cool with it because, again, 21st guy over the wall.
Yeah, right.
When he got there, or when whoever he's extolling the virtues of. I mean, there were warring factions on Vulcan, so I mean, Vulcan automatically became better when they stopped fighting. And so, yes, you could certainly see him thinking that, but he's been dead for centuries.
Yeah.
So,
I feel like, had let's say you could add another member to the team here, and let's say that Surak then becomes part of Spock's father. What do we feel that, like, Surak and Sarek would get along great? They'd have a lot to talk about, and they'd just be logic it up all the time, and Spock would feel even more left out than he does now by meeting Surak.
Yeah, quite possible. Oh, poor Spock.
See?
Poor Spock and his daddy issues, too. I was actually surprised to find out that, and I guess I shouldn't have been surprised to find this out, but that Surak is considered the father of Vulcan society, and Spock actually says somewhere in here, and father is a very important thing to the Vulcan society. Okay, well, that's not a surprise at all, because hello, daddy issues central.
Right.
Spock's on line 3, 4, 5, and 7. He's tying up all the lines. Could somebody please take care of this?
Right.
T'Pau oversees the fight around Pon farr in Amok Time. And by the way, I just remembered a character, a situation a character was in, and the name of an episode. So back off.
Good job.
Thank you very much. Yeah. That it's such a patriarchal society, and yet you have T'Pau overseeing one of the biggest things. I mean, I would have thought that Vulcan could have been fairly. Just, the cream would rise. And if that cream, was male, fine. If that cream was female, fine. But it actually starts to sound like it's much more of a patriarchal society than we might have been given to understand, Spock's daddy issues aside.
Well, and they did such a good job at getting rid of violence, except in their marriage rituals, which they still carry out in a fight to the death.
Well, that's just mass psychosis. They can't help that.
Yeah, okay.
It's interesting to ponder who might have appeared had the Excalbian scanned me. I think it might have been Colossus, or maybe Skynet. The good guys.
So just like the Excalbian, we have pulled apart this episode and taken it to the test to see what works, what doesn't work, and how it all comes together in the end. So, Ken, we always like to ask ourselves, does an episode of Star Trek hold up after all these many decades since it first aired? What about it here? What about the Savage Curtain? Does this hold up, Ken?
I want to say yes. And the problem that I'm having is the same problem that I've had with a lot of the Season 3 episodes that I want to say yes about. I don't know if it holds up or if it holds up for Season 3. We've had some really bad episodes this season. I will say, and maybe I'm doing too much Great Bird of the Galaxy kind of thing, but when Gene Roddenberry writes a story, I feel like there's a lot there to grapple with. I feel like there's a lot there to play with. the guy invented Star Trek, right? Mm-hmm. But he's not like the geek fan that came along to play in Star Trek.
Right.
He invented Star Trek with, sort of archetypes in mind, with this idea that we're going to get to a better place as a society. So rather than getting, stuck on, well, the warp drive is overheating, but I'll climb in this conduit and I'll fix that and I'll do that. He's actually good and evil. He's like, hey, guess what? 300 years from now, we're still going to be, grappling possibly with good and evil, which is a much bigger thing. So I want to say it holds up. There are logic problems, like, whose cardboard cutout is that? Right. Why is it doing what it's doing? Is there actually an it doing anything? Mm-hmm. Is this whole thing actually happening, inside Kirk's head? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work logically, but I feel like this episode works pretty well, with a couple of exceptions. The female scientist whose name I thought I would remember, but it doesn't really matter. Because she barely exists on the screen, and Genghis Khan, they don't work at all. But I do love I love Surak. I love meeting Surak.
Yeah.
The guy who played Lincoln is no Daniel Day-Lewis, but he'll do. What about you?
Yeah, I sadly have to say no. I reluctantly say no, it doesn't hold up. But here's the thing. Even though I feel like the episode doesn't really hold up, just like I said with The Way to Eden, I still like it. I really do, because it's kind of cool. It's too bad about the cheesy set and the cheesy rock costume, although I give them points for going out of their way to try to make something very alien. Again, like the Horta, so welcome back to Janos for that. And I really enjoy the idea of an alien messing with human psychology to try to understand or challenge them, because, of course, what Star Trek does is it holds that up as a mirror to ourselves. The pacing is mostly okay. There are a few fight scenes where the bad guys kind of have the upper hand and they just run away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's unfortunate.
Well, again, though, if the whole thing is built from Kirk's head, then Kirk's going to win.
Right. There you go. So this is really not a legitimate test after all in that case.
No.
So it's one of those where I feel like, I agree with you. This is a Gene Roddenberry version of Star Trek. I only wish that... I don't know if he originally wrote the story and then kind of disappeared and then this got made, or if he came back to work on it. But I feel like it's another one of those that needed an extra set of hands. It needed maybe a little DC Fontana or somebody else to kind of pull it all together. So it's not quite there. The first time I watched this episode, first time now watching this episode, not the first time I had ever seen it, but in preparation for our show, I kind of rolled my eyes. I remember this one with Lincoln and The Rock and blah, blah, blah. But then watching it 3 or 4 times, I really got into it again. And I really felt like, okay, there are good conversations here. There are good characters here. And I liked Surak. But at the end of the day, it doesn't hold up for me. And
what is it that's not working? Because you started off with, this episode does not work for me, and then did 3 minutes on what you like about it.
Well, I said the things I didn't like about it as well. I think the production value really hurts the story. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, the reality is that, okay, it's a show that was made nearly 50 years ago, and we try to be careful about, letting that be the sole arbiter of whether or not a show holds up. But I think this is one of those times where the story gets hurt by the production value, even though there are moments that have very good production value. But I also feel like the script, the logic of the script, things like that could have been tightened up. It could have used another set of hands. And I will say, continue to our next assignment is my absolute least favorite line in all of Star Trek endings. We've seen it a few times. We'll see it again. And for some reason, it just makes me pull my hair out. I feel like it's just a weak ending. But we didn't know what else to say, but we got to say something.
All right.
So... Yeah, but again, all that, like I said, I think it doesn't hold up, but I like it. So it's a tough thing to grapple with. But let's grapple with the messages, the morals, and meanings. What did you pull out of this, Ken?
Oh, I didn't get one. I mean,
Yeah?
I mean, there were a few different things, but I mean, there was a lot of stuff that could be picked over. It more felt like not like a greatest hits of, well, here's how we could be, here's how we should be, let's do all these things. But I mean, it was full of ideas that you expect somebody who is trying to make the future different or make the future better. You know, it was full of a lot of those ideas. I mean, like the whole thing we talked about 300 years from now, nobody's going to care what you call me. I'm not going to care what you call me because we're kind of over that now.
Yeah.
Is that immoral? Sure. But I mean, it's like a little one. It's not like the whole episode is not based on one thing. This will end up being my number one episode, Corbomite Maneuver. I mean, Corbomite Maneuver is built on a couple of ideas, and there are really two ideas, and you tunnel through and you tunnel through and you tunnel through, and you finally come to this like moral center of the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. This is not that. But I mean, there are things all throughout, sort of like, oh yeah, look, it's like that Lenny Bruce line. Okay, that's good. Let's go on to something else. I mean, we've got not quite a salad bar of stuff, but I mean, there are a few different things that you can pull out. But is there one message? I don't think so. It struck me as a fun and an interesting and an engaging sort of rumination on a few different ideas.
Yeah.
And for that, I mean, again, I'll give the worst episode of Star Trek props if it makes me or even encourages me to think about those things.
Sure.
But of course, then it's not the worst episode of Star Trek. The worst episode of Star Trek is Cat's Paw. Or Miri. I'm not sure which. I'm still in the fence. Probably Cat's Paw.
No Children Shall Lead?
Children Shall Lead gave me stuff to think about. As I believe, so shall I do, John.
See, I struggled with the idea of, is there a central message? I don't know, maybe the unintentional message. Sometimes you have to fight. Even as awful as that may be, sometimes an appeal to peace and logic simply won't work. So then you get back to this whole thing, well, can you only achieve peace if you're prepared for war? Because sometime all those overtures to peace won't work. It's unfortunate. But then I sort of stop myself and I ask myself, is that message Kirk's fault? Because he imagined the enemies who could not be reasoned with.
Well, no, but go the other way, though. I mean, the whole thing is an extension of the guy who wrote the story, right? We've had two or three different treatments of fighting versus not fighting from Gene Roddenberry. Some of them are not fighting is as simple as not fighting. That's true if both sides are on that same page, right? And we're done fighting. We're done fighting now. We don't necessarily agree, but we're not going to fight anymore. Then there's A Private Little War where there was no choice but to fight. And it wasn't about destroying. It wasn't even about winning. It was just, we have to keep fighting here so that this doesn't get worse.
Right.
And now we do have this third treatment of like, okay, peace, war, good, evil. Yes. I mean, it struck me as another examination of that whole fighting versus not fighting thing.
Well, they're put in an impossible situation. And again, you know, the conditions dictated that they had to fight. So,
or did they? I mean, you do have the Horda Light, the Excalbian, actually saying at the end of it, hey, you know, we just set up the parameters. You did what you did, which I disagree. I mean, I do think they were put in a situation where they had to fight, but maybe they didn't have to fight. I mean, maybe it's an examination then of Kirk's, you know, like when he says, we're about peace. Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. I mean, when this alien actually scans them, he's like, oh, they're about fighting.
Right,
So let's see how that goes. So I don't know.
There's a line that the Excalbian has, and that made me ask, are the methods and results of good and evil often indistinguishable? And I thought that was a fascinating line. That was a fascinating thing to tackle, if not only for the idea that is that Star Trek subverting its own message in that way? Because we're not presented with an alternative, really. So are we to just sort of assume that's the way it is, or do we go through this mental exercise saying, well, was there another way for them to get in and out of this? You know, you mentioned A Private Little War where we're not given the alternative. The only answer is that they fight. Right. And it's not necessarily they kill each other, and it's not necessarily that, you know, one destroys the other, but the answer is they fight, and they have to keep fighting. And it's sad, and it's unfortunate. But here we are with another episode where we just throw this out there and we say the methods and results of good and evil are often indistinguishable, and we're not really pointed toward the other direction. I thought that was a really interesting way to end this. Not a message, but definitely a heavy point made by the episode, or at least presented by the episode for us to kick around.
You see, now, if we had another hour, because what it reminds me of then is Pastor Casey from The Grapes of Wrath. There is no good, there is no bad, there's just things people do.
I would agree with that.
Well, I don't know that I would agree with that, but yeah, when you say that good and evil often, use the same... When the Excalbian says good and evil often use the same tactics and get the same results, well then, yeah. I mean, they're two sides of the same coin, or the same side of two coins, times being what they are. Man, that was just yet another pop reference. One day we should go back and catalog all these. You know what else we should do?
What's that?
We should let people know if they want to get in touch with us, how they can do that. Do you want me to do that, or do you want to do it?
You go right ahead, Ken. All
right. Well, if you want to contact us, you can do that on Facebook, Skype, or Twitter. The handle is MissionLogPod. You can call us 323-522-5641. That number again, 323-522-5641. You can email us, missionlog@roddenberry.com. That email address again, missionlog@roddenberry.com. Remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log.
Hey, Ken, next week, and we will be back next week, all our yesterdays.
On to our next assignment!
Oh, God, that's my least favorite.
Some of the music for the Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. Next week, a race of Kirk-like creatures hijacks the Enterprise for a combative cup of tea as they finally stage the age-old battle of pleasant versus unpleasant. But not really. End transmission.